happy to start this today with Thao Nguyen Phan, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and Barbara London, who's joined them for the second year in a row for the Talks program. So just a brief introduction on the whole Talks program, because this year what we'll try to do is like create synergies between the artists participating at the fair and the talks. So all the presentation that you will see during the morning joins curator and an artist who's also represented at the fair upstairs. And this is the case of Thao, who has a video that's called Tropical Siesta at Same Gallery. And I'm sure that you've also seen the video that was presented yesterday at the Fundación Miró, which was the result of a production process that was promoted by the Han Nefkens Foundation as part of the Han Nefkens Loop Video Art Production Award. And we've decided that this was a right way to introduce Thao's work, also because Barbara has deep knowledge of her work, and she was also in the jury who last year decided to award the prize to Thao. Just a few lines of introduction on the two of them. So Thao's works, mainly developing through the language of video, focus on literature, philosophy, and daily life. I'm sure you've seen the two examples at the fair and the Fundación Miró. Barbara is one of the greatest experts on time-based art and new media. She's a researcher, a writer, and a curator. She will be soon releasing a book. We have a preview here that's called Video Art, the First 50 Years, which will be published on January the 8th by FIDA. And she was also the founder of the New Media and Media Department at the MoMA. So her efforts and dedication to supporting new media and moving image works are great. So the floor is yours, and later we'll have time for questions.
Okay, thank you so much. So to start, I want to say thanks to Carlos Emilio and of course Carolina, because I'm delighted to be back at Loop. And I'm also delighted to be in conversation with Thao, whose magnificent new work opened last night at the Moreau Foundation, Becoming Alluvium. And I think I want to just shout out that Marco Daniels and his team at the museum were extraordinary. And also, I think Hans Nefkens and Hildy Tierlink are also extraordinary people. And everybody should have the catalog because it gives so much rich information on the background. So Thao, you're 32. You're very young to have done all of these remarkable works, including the three-part piece of last night. So you're born in Ho Chi Minh City, and you studied at the University of Fine Arts there. Then you went on to Singapore to do the BA at LaSalle College of Art, BFA, and then an MFA in Chicago at the School of the Art Institute. So maybe we'll start with a couple of things there that you, in writing and discussion, say that painting lacks a direct involvement with life, which was where you started. And then in Chicago, you told me yesterday that when you encountered Achipong Weerashanko's work, that it had a very profound influence. So maybe you can just get into a little bit of then your background. So sorry I talk fast, so I'll try to slow down.
So my background was a painter, and I am still a painter. My interest in video started, I think one of the first video pieces that I saw when I was a student in Vietnam was in 2006. And in 2006, there is a movement of Vietnamese Americans or Vietnamese overseas come back to Vietnam and to be artists and stay there. So there was a group of Vietnamese and French artists who Zoe Gray know well. One woman named Sandrine and her partner Bertrand, they open their apartment. Every week they will have a small event. So sometimes they have a graffiti, sometimes they have screening, sometimes they have like photography exhibition. And one week they show the piece of Bruce Nauman. He's just walking around in this piece. And I was with a group of my friends from the art school, and we were all painters. But I got very intrigued because this is something I never saw before. But all of my friends thought the piece was ridiculous. But I got very interested. But then after that, because after that, the couples, they didn't have enough funding to sustain the apartment space, and then they go on their individual practice, so they kind of stop the space. So I kind of just focus on my education in painting. And then when I did my MFA in Chicago, that was in 2011 to 2014. I was also in painting, but then I took a video installation class where I got introduced to artists that I don't really familiar with. And one of the pieces that is mentioned in the class was Vertical Roll by John Jonas, a person who later I got in very close contact with. But in the class it's a very brief introduction. But I got intrigued, but I never saw her work in person. But my most inspired kind of about filmmaking, about video, is from the work of the Thai filmmaker Apichapon Virasithakul, who studied in the school. He originally trained as an architect in Thailand and then moved to Chicago to study experimental film and went on to make more like feature films. And what I'm interested in his practice is not only as a film director, but his practice as a visual artist, because he also works with sculpture, he also works with photography, he works with short videos. So I can't find the way to create an environment of narrative, of storytelling, using visual art practice with video and paintings and objects. Yeah.
And another strong connection between your work and his is that he works with ordinary people, and he works in the countryside.
Mm.
So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I think I have a very deep interest in the countryside, even though I'm from a city. Because when I was in Vietnam, even though the school was very academic, but it gives me, it's a very different curriculum, because it's inspired by socialist realism. So every year you have to do a field trip, like a 1 or 2 months field trip to the countryside, or to the factory, or to somewhere that is not your town, just to observe how the farmers live, observe how the workers live. And it is a kind of, I feel it's a kind of socialist tradition. Like they do it with writers, they do it with songwriters too. Like those people who are like born in the cities are kind of bourgeoisie, and they need to be sent to the countryside to observe people, how people live. So every year we do that field trip, and we kind of submit, the exercise is to do sketches and observe people and do very academic painting based on the field trip. But I got inspiration from those field trips, and I think that really kind of rooted my interest in how people live outside of the condition of the city. Yeah.
So, good, you've got Joan there. So, in growing up also, I was very interested to learn that you were reading. You read a lot, I gather. that you were reading the work of Chinese classic authors, Turgenev, Dostoevsky, and Tolstoy, and the beautiful prose of the Japanese author Kawabata, and the Bengali author Chatterjee, whose work you drew upon for the new work. But maybe the storytelling, we get right into Joan, because you've got Joan up there. And Joan also is very close to writers, and she's a very deep reader. So why don't you talk about then when you got the Rolex Award, how that, the impact of Joan on you?
So maybe I share a little bit about why I'm into reading and literature.
Yes.
Because the environment that I grow up, we don't have art museums. We don't have contemporary art. That is not available. So I think my way to construct the way of storytelling is through mainly fictions, and many of them are fictions from the country that was close to Vietnam, such as the Soviet bloc or such as China. So there is many books that is translated from the Soviet bloc. But I'm more interested into the classic one like Dostoevsky or Chekhov or Pushkin, or like many Chinese classic also translated. So I read all of them, and I feel it's a kind of a bit narrow, but somehow it gives me a very particular way of thinking about literature. And after that, when the country is more open up and more translation is available, and I started to pick up English and I can start to read English book, then of course it's like a whole new universe. And but when I started to go to the art school, it was not so clear that I can combine this interest in fiction into the work. Until when I was in Chicago, it still not happened because I was still mainly working on paintings. But only when I saw Joan Jonas in 2016, when I was selected by her to be her mentee for the Rolex Mentor and Protege Art Initiative. So I didn't know her work personally. I never see it physically, just one time in the class. And at that time, I was very much still painting. But when I meet her, somehow I can feel about her interest, that she's interested in something that I also very interested in. And I basically just follow her everywhere. I see how she constructed her video installations, how she constructed her performances, and she took a lot of references from literature, and she worked a lot with children, which I kind of inspired by, and you can see it in my work.
So I'm trying to think what I want to say. So, Joan, I followed Joan a long time, and Joan starts a work, perfects, and then it's out in the world and it's finished. Your work is parallel, but to me your work has a very essayistic form. You're telling stories. Joan is telling stories too. You're not out of a Chris Marker tradition, but it's very much maybe out of Achipang's tradition, do you think? Or I'm not sure. Because I think it's almost like a visual essay, your work.
Yeah.
You call them moving stories.
Yeah. Because I'm very interested in fiction.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in fiction as a form,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't want to describe it in visually. So that's why I'm not really into medium or style, but very into storytelling. For example, I have made a trilogy so far about the Vietnamese countryside. The first piece is Tropical Siesta that you could see at Zing Gallery. The second piece is called Migraine. It's not showing here, but it's currently shown at the Rockburn Museum in Shanghai as a part of the Hugo Boss Asia Art Award finalists. And then the third piece is Becoming Alluvium that is currently on view at John Muir Foundation. And each piece has a kind of clear and specific subject matter that I kind of want to talk about. And sometimes when because I have the need to know these stories. These are the kind of stories about historical amnesia, about tragedy, about environmental collapse, that somehow in my living environment, things, official history are manipulated, are obscure. So the work is kind of my way of investigation of how a kind of truth can be understood. That's why it's always very specific. It's about something that is a clear subject matter, but the way to tell this story, it could be a little bit broad and loose. Yeah.
Did everybody here see the work last night? Most people? So, yeah, okay. I just wanted to know, did we, because Thao has a clip as well, but do you think we need to show that for?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're a very dedicated audience, which is why I love Luke. And
this one, I think I will show at the near to the end.
So these are very complicated works and very complex to make. So you've done the research into the storytelling,
Yeah.
you've done history, you've gone archival research, you've got your drawings, you've got music, you've got so many things. Do you want to talk about part of that, how you make it? Because it must taken you a year at least.
Yeah. So I got the original idea since 2012, when since the early 2000s, there is the issues raised up in Southeast Asia, in the country that share the Mekong River, such as China, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Burma, and Thailand, of how to, because the river go to all of these countries, and how to take advantage of the river in a peaceful way, in a kind of sharing the profit. But then there is the issues of dam buildings for hydropower from the upstream river in China, because that China at that time it becomes very powerful, and of course they wanted to have economic progress. So they started to build 7 dams in the Lankan River, which is the north, which is in Yunnan in China, and then the country downstream they started to follow, and there is dams everywhere. So since that time on, the Mekong Delta, which is the south part of Vietnam, every year we have the monsoon, so naturally we should have natural flood from the river during the monsoon. The flood, even though it's kind of raise up the water in the area, but it was good flood because it brings alluvium to the land, and it makes the land very rich for rice cultivation. So the Mekong Delta of Vietnam is like the basket of rice for the whole country. But since now, because the river is kind of blocked in many different positions, so there's no more natural flood coming in the monsoon, and that is really odd. So I started to have the interest in it, but I only started to physically make the video when I got the support from the Hans Nepken Foundation. So the video is a result of a field trip to the Mekong Delta, the Vietnam part, and I feel this piece is an ongoing piece because I really want to continue my expedition to other parts of the Mekong that is outside of Vietnam. And because the work is kind of have a heavy subject matter, so I really want to find a way to balance between the social commentary, the documentary, with a way of storytelling that is more similar to my my art making. And when I already did the field trip, and I kept editing the video, and it was difficult for me how to end the video because I make them in small chapters. Each chapters I call them reincarnations, and reincarnations is an idea of a circular time, so there's no beginning and no end. So I can just keep going, make them forever. But somehow I want a work at this moment to have a kind of ending point. So I researched, and I realized that from 1866 to 1868, the French government sent a group of French explorers to explore the Mekong River. At that time, it's of course a very pristine space, no human interventions, just civilization, wet-dry civilization that is already there. And they start the trip from Saigon, and they went to Cambodia, and they got very interested in Khmer art and Angkor Wat. So in their book, in the illustration, there are hundreds of drawings of Khmer temples and Angkor Wat. And then they go upstream, go to Laos, Burma, and they ended in Yunnan, but they couldn't go up to Tibet because the current of the river was so difficult. They didn't have the means to go there. So I have used these drawings and to tell a folk tale that is taken from a book, the first book with the purple cover. It's a collection of folk tales from Cambodia. So I found one story. It is about one princess in a kingdom, and she looking at the rain in the monsoon, and she saw beautiful dew that is falling on the orchid garden, and she wanted to have jewelry made from the dew. But then it was of course impossible. So she asked her father to ask all of the goldsmiths in the kingdom to make it, but it couldn't happen. So in the end, it's like a longing for something in vain. It's impossible. But then in my animation, I changed the script. I added like the Europeans, I added the monk. So it's a little bit become my version of this story. Yeah.
So you do a lot of research, and you were saying yesterday that you went into the Musée Guimet in Paris. And was it the sculpture there, or the literature and the, whatever you call it, the books that you found there?
So in the end of the Becoming Alluvium, the animation part, I kind of have I invent the characters the same way I did with Tropical Siesta and Midgrain. So these characters are inspired by my trip to the Museum Guimet in Paris, because when I go there, I see many statues, but some only have the heads and some only with the body. And many of them are Cambodia, but some also from Burma and Vietnam. So I just feel very odd. Yeah, I couldn't describe my feeling, but then I just think of a character that dressed in the way of a farmer in the south part of Vietnam, where the Vietnamese people, we share a lot of influences from Khmer culture. So you see a Vietnamese woman farmer, traditionally they wear these costumes, but in Cambodia they also wear similar, because the part of Vietnam in the south is actually a result of an expansion. It was not originally Vietnam. It was, I think it's more belonged to the Cambodia kingdom. But during the 17th century, because we got invaded by the Chinese, so we decided to expand it south. And the Vietnamese, after that they invaded Champa, and then they invaded, they take over the south. So it's a very problematic history with, I just have questions. I don't have the answer, but I'm questioning about all these conflict, and yeah.
It's very beautiful the way it's all woven together. So it's very complicated how you work. So you do shooting, you do the drawing, and you have a group you work with. You call them art labor.
Mm.
And did they contribute to the production? Were they part of the making?
So the practice with art labor is very separate, very different, because art labor consists of one curator, Alette, and my partner, and we usually work more community-based project. So because our family, every summer we went to the countryside where my husband has a family coffee farm, and we and it's also a kind of complex situation because that is the Central Highlands, and it's originally just the indigenous, the Jarai people. But since the 60s and more in the 90s, there is a movement of immigrants from the poorer land delta of Vietnam to go to the Central Highlands to have more like plantations, coffee, pepper, rubber. And the plantation already, the concept they already have since the French colonial period. And then after that, it was more like collective plantation that belongs to the state, and now it's more like private plantation. And I can really see how this movement really bring up the profit, because Vietnam become the second largest exporter of Robusta coffee, up just right behind Brazil. But it's really destroyed the environment, the habitat, the way of living of the people from the original community, and with art labor, we kind of try to find a way to overcome this gap, to try to find a balance between making a living with coffee and preserving the culture and living harmoniously between the ethnic groups. So that's more like the collective work.
And in becoming Alluvium, the children are also ethnic minority, or those are your husband's? They're sort of like family as well.
Yeah. So in becoming Alluvium, I don't really have many children in the piece. It's just two boys and their family relatives. Yeah. But in Tropical Siesta, the piece that you see at Gallery Sing is the family relative together with the children in the village.
And you were saying yesterday, I was asking you about how you work with the children. You give them a sort of idea, and they enact, and you shoot them as they are performing.
So the way I work with children is through improvisations and instructions. So I don't have a solid script. Usually I have a set of actions. For example, in mid-grade and in Tropical Siesta, since it's a bigger group of children, so I would have a kind of description such as pretend that you are a fireflies, and that the children will use the small LED lights to attach on their body to pretend that they are fireflies, or like let's dance with the sunflower, or like pretend that you are sleeping in class in the school. And some part the children improvise, such as in Tropical Siesta and in mid-grade, they play musical instruments such as the bamboo flute, such as making sound with the bricks, or and many parts the children when they play, and I watch them, and then I tell them that if I can film them, and I incorporate that into my existing set of actions. Yeah.
Oops, I don't think so, there's a term, now my computer went to sleep. Okay, there it is. What is the term you use? Oh, ecological responsibility. So that's both art labor and your own practice.
Yeah.
Because the Mekong and everything you've been talking about, there's...
I think that is it is very relevant because actually when I first come to outside of Vietnam, because when I was a little kid studying history books, and I studied that like the European country had in the industrial revolution. So they have a lot of factories and there's a lot of chimneys and it's just like in kind of polluted society. That was my vision in the history book, how they teach the kids. And they say that Vietnam is very beautiful, we have beautiful beaches, we have beautiful forests, very, very green, very nice. But actually the first time I travel outside, I realized that it's just the opposite, because Vietnam it open to open economy. We have a reformation in 1986, in which we started to accept foreign investment. We started to develop the economy, and because we was in closed period for so long, for many years. So when we have the chance to make money, to become open to the world, everything just changed so fast. It's in a pace that almost self-destructive. So, for example, when I went to the farm, the first time I came to my husband's coffee farm, it was a farm that is surrounded by little forests, because the concept of the people who live there is they have the farm, but they also need the forest, the little jungle, because in that little jungle they can cut the bamboo, or they can find the orchid, or they can collect the wood. But after 1 year, all of these small forests that is existing in the village is gone, and it's going away so fast that it was kind of shock and surprise for me. So since I started to have this relationship with the village in the countryside, then I really can see what's going on is like real. It's not fiction. So I really want to reflect that concern in my work. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's a very beautiful landscape, but a very harsh reality. And in a way you deal with dreams as a way to kind of go back and forth. And that's what Achipang also does. Or Joan deals with dreams too.
Yeah.
So the dreams are very nurturing.
Yeah, totally. I think to illustrate this idea about dream, I would show one video piece.
Okay.
It's not my video, but it's an inspiration to make many of the pieces.
Okay, great.
Rằm tháng 7, ở cạnh miếu này người ta họp chợ để những người sống và những người chết được gặp nhau.
This film is made in 1984, even though it looks very old, but it's
Yeah.
made from 1984 by a Vietnamese director named Dan Nhật Minh, and it's called Until October Comes. And the sequence that I saw, for me, is kind of a metaphor for how film is for me is like reincarnations, because in this part it's about a woman whose husband went to the war, and that was a kind of unknown war because in the 80s the Vietnam War is already ended, but we have other wars going on because the Vietnamese they send the troops to Cambodia, and then there is also the fighting with the Chinese in the border. So the husband went to fight with the Chinese, and that was in the early 80s, and nobody talked about this war. But then this is because the woman couldn't receive news from her husband, so she, in her dream, she dreamed that she went to a kind of market, but this is a very special kind of market where the people that already passed away can meet the people who are still alive. So through this dream, the woman can meet her husband, and that is like a reunion, but in a kind of metaphoric way. And I think in the context of Vietnam, this case is very popular, like women looking for their deceased husband through dreams. So I kind of use this as inspiration for some of my other video works, such as Mute Grain, that is not on view now, but it's a part of a trilogy. Yeah.
And in that, the two characters, March and August, are very parallel. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, how are we doing for time? Okay. So, maybe I'll just note that at the end of Becoming Alluvium, you mentioned Joan, and you also mentioned Zoe Butt. And Zoe is a very important figure in Vietnam, I think, because she's very supportive. No,
Yeah.
Zoe, I forget if Zoe's American.
She's Australian.
Australian, okay. But she's very, very, very keyed into the culture, very understands the politics. Do you want to say a little bit of how she's also been an inspiration?
Yeah, sure. In Vietnam, in the late 2000s, there's a group of Vietnamese Americans who are actually educated in the States and have American citizenship, and came back to Vietnam, and they opened independent art space. It's called San Art.
Yes.
That the founder include the American Vietnamese artist Đinh Kieu Lê, and there's a group of artists that also work a lot with videos, the Propeller Group, and Tiffany Chung. And then they invited Zoe Butt to come to Vietnam and to see if she can be the director of San Art, because they have a friendship for a long time. That was I think in 2007, 2008 or something, and then the space was closed down. The space was closed down many times because they are in the blacklist. so they cannot really have a public program. Everything is kind of had to be underground. So Zoe came to San Art, and she worked in San Art for almost a decade running the program, and they designed a artist residency program. It's called the San Art Lab, and that the residency program that when I just finished my study in Chicago, when I decided to come back to Saigon, is to be a part of this very special residency, and I think in a way the space of San Art is really nurturing many generation of Vietnamese contemporary artists, and now we started to have more art space, which is very amazing. We never had that before. Before maybe just one or two, and then now we have 3 or 4, and we started to have more artists practicing locally, and more artists that is trained overseas and then come back and practice. So for me, it's a positive development. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great. So maybe I end with one little quote. It's from Nam June Paik, the video pioneer, who once said, "The future is the culture that you carry around in your head." And I think you have given us a lot to take in our heads. So, yeah. So now we can open it up.
Do you have questions? So maybe I can start with one. Do you have one?
Yeah, maybe you can expand a little bit about on the beheading in your drawings that you. So I understand that there was a relationship with the museum that you went to visit, but are there more metaphors behind it? Because it's a very powerful, almost gruesome image that you present to us. Can you expand a little bit on that and why you specifically depicted it that way?
I think it's just like a very direct and physical response to what I saw in the museum collection. Because I think that happened a lot in Southeast Asia, in temples or in heritage site, and probably there is a kind of system of looting. I don't know, but it used to be happen and it's still happening, and it's very interesting because I took the picture of one of the statues. It was Vietnamese Buddha, lacquer Buddha from Vietnam, and I sent it to my friend who is a lacquer artist, and he was saying that, oh, how beautiful! Luckily that the French got this to Paris, so it was not lost, so everyone can see it, and it's such a contradiction because many people are afraid that if it stay in its original place, it might be destroyed. So maybe the way to protect it is to bring it somewhere else where it could be in a room with air conditioning and it's open to the public and everyone can see it. So when I hear my friend saying that, it's kind of, wow, this is very interesting. Mm-hmm. So I kind of have that thinking, and I don't know, maybe just intuitively it goes into the work. Yeah.
I also have a question for you. So as we were preparing this edition of Loop, I've been reading Jacques Rancière, and there's a thing that he says that says like, you cannot tell the logic of facts from the logic of fiction. Mm-hmm. And in a way that makes me think a lot about your practice, your creative process, because of course you tell a story that it's real, the story of our country, but you do it by deploying imagination, and then you also add the dream, which I think it's imagination to an unconscious level. So I think, I don't know, wanted to ask you if you could elaborate on those 3 levels. Like fact, the imagination, and dreams. So how they play in your works.
So I think I would be more on the side of imagination and dreams, because the way of understanding reality and fact is very different individually, because of that background, the gender, of the education. So the way Barbara thinks about video art may be very different from what I think with my education, with my background, with my experience. So I think my practice is kind of slippery, because I don't try to make a statement. I I just want to explore what I care, what I'm concerned about in a visual way. Yeah. So that's as far as I could go. I don't know. Yeah. Mm.
Do you have more questions in the audience? Okay, so if we don't have more questions, I really encourage you to go to Gallery Zinc upstairs and see Tropical Siesta and the Fundación Miro to enjoy becoming Alluvium. Thank you so much for this insightful conversation and for your inspiring work. I think it has many layers. Thank you all for being here. And for those who are interested, the upcoming talks will be in 15 minutes with Anna Santomauro, who's the program curator of an art organization that's called Arts Catalyst, that dedicates to produce projects mainly with moving image that are socially and politically committed. So thank you again, Tom, Barbara, and thank you all.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.